First of all, want to start by congratulating you. The last 2 days, couldn't have been easy. They weren't easy on anybody, but you obviously did a darn good job. And the fact that you're here, we are very much looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. We're going to introduce ourselves, then ask you to do the same thing in your teacher, and then I'll read you the question, which, by the way, if you're wondering, is going to be the first question. My name is Lindsay Draper. I'm retired from the juvenile court bench here in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin.
Hi, I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Mackey. I'm in the history department at the University of Louisville and the law school here at the University of Louisville.
Would you introduce yourselves and your teacher, please?
Hello, my name is Reed Schwan, and I'm a National Merit Scholar.
Hi, my name is Cole Evans, and I am the tenor section leader in my school's top choir.
And my name is Susan Sharp, and I'm our school student body vice president. And our coaches are Ms. Lindblom and Ms. Lutzenberger.
To my fellow judges, I just want to point out that I see "We the People" pins on lapels. You all have no idea what that was, but okay. So the question reads, what were the major disagreements among the 55 delegates during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and how were they resolved? What issues, if any, were not resolved, and what were the consequences? What changes, if any, should be made to the Constitution? Please begin.
The desire to be seen is uniquely human. To be unseen leaves a human incomplete. While not every U.S. citizen could directly inform the design of the Constitution, the delegates at the convention were tasked to represent the unseen.
And while the delegates disagreed about representation, slavery, and sovereignty, they worked towards compromise to create the Constitution. Even so, they were unable to accurately see the humanity in a large part of the population, and in doing so, left a legacy of inequality and misrepresentation that is still seen today.
The first contention between the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention was the matter of representation. The Virginia plan proposed proportional representation of the people, while the New Jersey plan proposed equal representation of the states. So the Great Compromise, enumerated in Article 1, Sections 2 and 3, resolved this with a bicameral legislature.
Yet the House was based on population, so the question became, who counted as a person? Article 1, Section 2 condemned enslaved people to count as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation.
Another key disagreement focused on the balance of power between nation and state. The founder's solution was a federal government with separation of powers and checks and balances. While Article 6 granted national supremacy, unenumerated power was reserved to the states.
The Commerce Power continued the debate on sovereignty and slavery. The Constitution granted the power to regulate trade to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. However, compromise included no taxes on exports, a tax of no more than $10 per person on enslaved people, and a protection of the slave trade for another 20 years.
Once again, the nefarious institution, slavery, forced compromise that stained the soul of America, which is still seen today.
Despite many compromises, the issues of representation, equality, and sovereignty persist. In addition, the Constitution left many questions unresolved, among which include, should the national government protect the rights of the people in the states? Can a state secede from the Union? Does the president need approval of the Senate to fire a cabinet member? These questions resulted in the Bill of Rights, the Civil War, and the impeachment of Andrew Johnson.
However, the primary unresolved issue we are most concerned with was the persistence of slavery. The constitutional compromises over slavery led to the Civil War, resulting in the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment ending the legality of chattel slavery.
But this freedom did not provide equality or protection for newly freed persons. Reconstruction failed. Jim Crow violated. Systemic racism endures.
While the issues of equality and representation have been addressed through the passage of the 14th, 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendments, these monumental changes are insufficient. In the words of Frederick Douglass, the true way and the easiest way is to make our government entirely consistent with itself and give to every loyal citizen the elective franchise, a right and power which will be ever present and will form a wall of fire for his protection.
Therefore, strict voter ID laws, reduced early voting, voter registration restrictions, and partisan gerrymandering, the barriers that corrupt our voting and skew representation, must be eradicated. These remedies include the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, with which Congress would establish standards for legitimacy and consistency of elections. This would also empower the courts to check partisan and discriminatory actions, further protecting the unseen.
However, passing this law would not fully secure these benefits. Thus, these same measures should be amended to the Constitution to ensure other laws or Supreme Court rulings would not overturn it. By doing so, our country can take one step closer to voter equality and subsequently equal representation for all.
In Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, the narrator, an unnamed Black man laments, "I am an invisible man. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible simply because people refuse to see me."
The US Constitution has yet to see all of its citizens. And while some of those citizens remain invisible, it is the duty of our nation to ensure that each person is truly seen without compromise.
Thank you. So let me start with what strikes me as being the focus of your presentation. It seems as though the elite, money, carried the day over the idealism, morals. Money versus morals is how I hear what you're saying, and money won. We made pragmatic decisions based on economic interest. Is that a correct reading of what you're telling me?
Well, I would argue it's not simply the money. It was those delegates that were at the convention. And though they all came from the elite, from the wealthy class, they compromised because of the issues in the South. And because slavery was so impactful in the South, delegates such as Patrick Henry even said that they would not support the Constitution and that their state would not ratify it if they did not allow slavery in that document.
However, I would say that you are correct that it did have a lot to do with money, because although the South definitely benefited economically from slavery, so did the North. Basically, the entire nation's economics really did have a lot to do with slavery. And just coming out of the Revolutionary War and spending all that money on a war, the nation was already struggling financially, especially with the failure of the Articles of Confederation and issues with taxes and funding our nation. Getting rid of slavery would have really economically devastated the nation.
And just to emphasize that economic devastation even more that Susan talked about, if we look specifically under the articles with the requisition system, the states fearing the taxation without representation under the British system and removing that taxation power from the new executive government created under the articles, had this problem with actually going up to that. They had a problem with actually paying their dues. And this can be seen with the requisition systems in which 16% was the only amount paid. And therefore we left heavy debt with the French and Dutch payments that we owed after the American Revolution.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Judge.
Mr. Lindsay, I believe you're muted. Yeah.
I was deferring to my
Yeah.
colleague for the question.
I thought Judge Tubman was getting in there. Let me then come in here. I think you've said a lot of really sort of interesting issues, and you've raised some interesting issues here. In particular, sometimes scholars talk about political parties as the lubricants of the Constitution, as these unmentioned institutions that develop, but the Constitution couldn't work without them. Help me understand the relationship between political parties and the Constitution, if any.
So we see that the founders didn't actually want political parties, but they knew they would occur. George Washington's farewell address warns against political parties, and Thomas Jefferson actually mentions how political parties will guide factions together, and it was natural state of man to go into these two political parties. But in instituting the Constitution, they didn't want to essentially force this two-party system because they saw the dangers it presented in what we modern day call, as Lee Drutman refers to it, as the two-party doom loop, where ideals continuously shift to the extremes as the two parties transition power back and forth and gain more and more power along the centuries.
And one of the reasons that the founders didn't want to mention any or have anything to do with these political parties is because most of them stemmed from England, and England had just been involved in a bloody civil war between the factions in England. But while these political parties have many issues, there's also good things to be said about political parties with the Constitution and the running of our government, because it does provide an easier way for citizens to be more involved in government, because it does like a lot of citizens will choose a party based on a few things that they align with. And then in our state, you can vote straight ticket for your party. So there was a Pew Research Center poll that said that around like less than half of each political party, members of each political party actually really thought about who they're voting for rather than just voting straight ticket.
Going back to the Constitutional Convention, can you tell us what the framers thought about the issue of the executive and the presidency?
So the main problem with the executive is they feared the power that would be reliant within that, right? Like, as we mentioned, they came from this revolution from British with no with taxation without representation, right? And in many of the plans, such as Madison's plan, these single executive was proposed, and then in the New Jersey plan, this idea of a three-party or of a three multi-member executive was proposed. So really, the main argument there within the convention was this idea of how do we balance the power that we are giving the executive government, because we do not want to have another problem with that, as well as we want to keep our sovereign states. We want to keep the powers that the states already had going into this convention, because as we mentioned, they were very elitist, they were white, wealthy, and they did want to represent the power that they also had within their states.
Furthermore, Madison argues of an energetic executive being a single executive, because when you have multiple executives, they essentially shift blame on each other, and thus the people can't hold one executive responsible. Additionally, when you have a single executive, this allows the executive to make quick decisions, especially in times of war. Hence why in Article 2, we grant the executive the power over wartime measures.
And we can see also in Article 2 of the Constitution, the powers of the executive are very vague. It doesn't go into great detail about what the powers of the executive are. And I think that one of the reasons that this was because they were worried about giving the executive too much power. But I think that they actually ended up giving the executive more power than they intended with their vagueness. And we can see this with just right after the Constitution was ratified, when Thomas Jefferson was president, he acquired the Louisiana Purchase, and even he was questioning the legality of whether he had the power to do that. And we can see throughout our nation's history with the usage of many executive orders that the power of the presidency is continuing to expand.
If I were to indicate to you that I believe all three branches of government have done power grabs, that the executive branch, obviously, the executive orders, et cetera, Congress. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to even consider that. And the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage, for instance, would be something. Would you agree or disagree with me?
I would definitely agree that the national government as a whole has expanded its power over time. And we even saw this with during the Black Lives Matter movements in Portland, Oregon. The national troops came in to break up that riot, despite the governor with his police powers telling them that they did not want aid, but rather wanted to take care of it on their own state basis. So over this timeline of the history of the nation, we've seen that all three branches have continued to expand their powers at the expense of the states.
We can also see that through Marbury v. Madison in 1803 is when the court established judicial review, which is found nowhere in the actual Constitution in Article 3. But through that process of judicial review, it's also allowed the judicial branch to expand power through something called legislating from the bench, where through judicial review, they've actually been able to, and other court decisions, they create laws, like through Roe v. Wade, legislating how a woman can treat her body.
I think it's also.
What I'm hearing, hang on, Mr. Evans, what I'm hearing, dealing with Judge Draper's question, is that you folks believe that the Anti-Federalists got the interpretation correct.
Well, I believe there was there was correctness to both sides, right? The Federalists also believed that they implemented that implementing the system of checks and balances would be proven to be a good thing, and that the government's
But it's failed.
Well, one second. So like throughout history, we have seen this kind of power grab or power balance as the Federalists intended with the system of federalism, which can be seen with this idea that we mentioned, our rhetorical question in the essay of, can the president fire a cabinet member?
Okay. Wish we had an hour, or at least a half an hour. Right. But clearly you guys have thought about these issues, you've engaged in them, you're willing to go back and forth, especially if when challenged in kind of a Socratic way, like I was just doing with Mr. Evans. Sorry about that, or
you're good.
Congratulations, I'm not sure which. So that I think you do want to be careful about, because you clearly drifted into being anti-federalists and strict constructionists, and I'm not sure that's exactly where you wanted to go, but that's kind of where you ended up, at least in some ways. Now, a couple things. I thought you did a nice job of covering the waterfront, of pressing your thesis home, and you had so much to say that you were rushing, and at times it was tough to keep up with you. Breathe, focus, make sure you had a strong argument. You just don't have to keep hitting us over the head with it quite as much. So it's an observation, not really something to ding you on there, because you clearly are passionate about this, and I like that a lot. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to tell you how much I enjoyed your presentation, and two things I feel compelled to comment on. One is how, we got to talk about constitutional application, and how at some point you all said, by the way, let me tell you what parts of the Supreme Court, you all made a point of saying, these were our ideas. These were the things. And by the way, this is where this came from. I thought you did an excellent job of that. And the reason that I want to talk about that has to do with point number 2. And that is, for the years that I have judged this, I think this is the first time I've ever heard anybody talk about Invisible Man. That book is one of the books that frankly helped shape who I am as a human being. And so when I hear somebody say, that wasn't just a book that some people ought to read, it was a book that relates to who we are as a country, and maybe we don't talk about that part of the country. You have no idea how much you warmed my heart with that quote. So I'll stop so others can talk, but I just need to tell you, I liked power grab versus power balance, by the way, your insistence on saying, I'm not gonna let you put me in that corner. That was really, okay, very good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you did a nice job as well. I liked your discussion of the issues that the founders faced or at the convention, including slavery, federal power, and particularly the commerce power, which was good, and that the unresolved issues that you focused on were slavery and voting rights, and then you mentioned all the amendments that have enhanced voting rights over the years. I thought that was good. When you answered questions, I thought you did a nice job, but when you were talking about an increase in the power of the national government, there are many examples where that's true, but it's not always true. For example, many states have legalized the use of marijuana, and that's been done through the states. Many states have established laws regulating the use of guns. That's been done by the states, not at the national level. And finally, as a judge, I would point out that when people talk about legislating from the bench, it's often said that whether you think a judge is legislating from the bench depends on whether you agree with the judge's ruling. Because judges would say, most judges, I think, would say, we don't legislate from the bench. We're interpreting the Constitution, or we're interpreting statutes. And so there are different perspectives on how courts rule and how judges rule in individual cases. But overall, I think you did a really good job, and I commend you for your presentation today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
All right, congrats.